I was born in March 1941. My parents were Lou and Betty Kanaster, who also grew up in San Pedro. During World War II, my dad worked at Todd's shipyard. And when the war was over, he went into business with my uncle. It was called Kanaster's Menswear. And it was my grandfather's business, and they went in as partners. And in those days, now this is the 1940s, in those days there were so many shops that would cater to men. There was Yale Waterman's, Brown Brothers, Slats for Men, Norman's, and of course Kanaster's, my family store. But there were also shops for women. Lillian's, Gladys Fowler, Hazel Taylor, Lewis, Elsie Dean. And there were two shops that catered to children and babies, Lad and Lassie and Bunny Shop. So 6th Street and part of Pacific Avenue, that's where most of the shopping was. And there were also two large stores, and I kind of remember one being McCorkle's on 10th and Pacific. It was probably kind of like a department store, I'm not sure, but when I was a child, I just remember that the toy department was downstairs, so that was my favorite place. There was also Dunlap's on 6th and Pacific, and Dunlap's was a real department store, much smaller, of course, than the ones we have today. We also had 5 and dime stores, and that literally was where you could go in and buy something for 5 cents or 10 cents. Not everything, but we had Newberry's on Pacific. We had Cress on 7th and Pacific. Both had lunch counters. So you could go and sit down at lunch counter and have lunch. And then we had Woolworth's down on 6th Street. So those were the main stores, but there were also specialty shops where you could buy just about anything. You had Bradford's paint store, where they sold paint, but they also sold model airplanes. We had Harbor Office Supply that gave you everything in the way of office goods. Union War Surplus that sold everything, from soup to nuts, they say. And we had Vine's Music, which was my very favorite store, because not only did it have sheet music for my piano, but it had record booths where you could select a single, and you could go sit in a soundproof booth and you could listen to the record. And if you liked it, then you could buy it. And you could sit there for hours. They never minded how long you stayed. We had Fairman's Sports Shop on 6th Street that dealt in tennis especially because Mr. Fairman was a tennis instructor. There were so many. There's Williams Bookstore, which up until just a few years ago lasted quite a long time. We had many jewelry stores, many shoe stores, and we had a Norwegian bakery called Christensen Norwegian Bakery. It was located on 6th Street, and then later, Mr. Christensen moved to Pacific around 13th, which now the building is used as San Pedro Ballet. So in those days, you could shop in downtown San Pedro, and you did not have to go anywhere out of town because everything was there. And also, speaking of bakeries, if you were in town at the right time of day, you could smell the bread baking because DeCarlo's Bakery was located on 9th Street just below Pacific. And every day you could smell the fresh bread baking. So we really, as I said, we never had to go out of town to shop because everything was here. And as far as recreation growing up, when I got to be a teenager, we had 3 movie theaters. We had the Warner, we called Warner Brothers then, now it's Warner Grand. We had the Strand, which was a much smaller theater around 11th and Pacific. And we had the Cabrillo Theater down on 7th around Palo Verde. We also had a roller skating rink, and that's where I spent most of my time, in the roller skating rink. And we had a bowling alley on Pacific around 12th Street, which later became the Dancing Waters. And after we would go roller skating or we'd go to the movies, we would go to Charlie Ellis's because he made the best malts and hamburgers. Or we went to Thrifty Drug, and Thrifty Drug was on the corner of 9th and Pacific. And in the back were booths set up where you could sit and order a vanilla Coke or a cherry Coke. And in each booth was a little jukebox that you could put a nickel in or a dime in, and you could pick whatever song you wanted. So we'd hang out there. So that was downtown San Pedro in the 40s and 50s, and I'd say maybe into a little bit of the 60s, I'm not sure. But anyway, that's my recollection growing up in San Pedro.